So let's start talking about something that you've probably had to talk about a lot already. But how did you go about translating Owen's original concept to the screen, and where, I suppose, more importantly, did you feel you could most put your own stamp on it?
Well, I read Owen's script, which was an adaptation of his own short story, Untimely. And I just sort of was getting involved when the writers' strike happened. So I was unable to like talk to Owen um, because of the strikes. And so I had to sort of go straight into it and get into pre-production. It was only a few months later when I was deep in it when I got to meet Owen, and we actually got on like a house on fire, and it's been really great meeting and getting to know him. But his script sort of spoke to me, I suppose, as a sort of in a number of ways, both as a sort of fan of um I guess kind of like a certain teenage angst horror that I grew up watching, like movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street or The Lost Boys or The Blob or Fright Night. Um, and then a little bit later, like Donnie Darko and stuff. And then it had this great simple mythology of the death whistle, which was not something I was familiar with. And I hadn't seen a movie based around this kind of ancient cursed object before. So I then was able to do lots of research, and I was amazed at how it was all coming from a real place, with artistic liberties
Mm.
from Owen in there. So, but I also really loved the other two things were this sort of emotional story going through it, this kind of story of grief, and the way this cursed object tapped into grief and tapped into death, and kind of also as well as terrorizing this group in the movie, sort of actually sort of brings this sort of love story together between Chris and Ellie. So I always look for the heart, and it had a great heart.
Mm.
So horror with heart was something I was interested in. And then the third thing was the deaths, and seeing this opportunity to make a number of cinematic perishments, which is what I'm calling them.
Yeah.
So it was exciting as someone who loves kind of to be immersed in a movie, to
Mm.
try to find a movie that had a world apparent, both sort of teenage psychologically, in sort of this particular age and time of sort of failed romance and school and issues, and then have all of these deaths that are going to come and hunt them down, and how to visualize them. So in terms of putting my stamp down, it was in all of that really.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, actually, I want to come back to the deaths if I get time actually in a sec. But obviously, you've talked before, as you have just now, about growing up on 80s horror, as
Yeah,
I did,
yeah,
and Whistle feels very in tune with that era.
yeah.
And that's one of the things I really liked about it. Was it the chance to play in that kind of space that really drew you to this project, do you think?
It was definitely one of them. As a horror director, or a director who likes to make horror films as well as others, um, the high school horror movie is its own little genre, and I'd seen many of them and grown up watching many films. Like I said, sort of Nightmare on Elm Street being one of the origins for me, and as well as non-horror, The Breakfast Club. So it's probably been in me for some time of like, oh, I wonder what my American high school movie would be. And it's not so much the high school setting, it's what how that kind of is the environment in which the horror is gonna set upon this group of friends, and how. And so I think it was always something I was considering. And then when I read Owen's script, I sort of like, okay, this is my high school horror movie.
A lot of the cast, obviously, who you were working with in the film, they didn't necessarily grow up with the films that Whistle kind of takes those elements from.
Mhm.
So, did you set them any 80s movie homework, or were you more interested in just sort of letting them find their own way into it?
I did, but as I got them all together, because we were only able to sort of assemble the ensemble in person once they'd been cast, a week or so before shooting. So I had a kind of quite a weekend that I planned for them, not to just sit and do table reads, but to do some experiences.
Hmm.
That involved taking them to Dan Iaboni, who's the stunt coordinator, he had a really amazing gym space that we all got to mess around in and go up on the wires and play with foam lightsabers and stuff. And then also kind of to have lunch at my house and do a friendly table read. But the thing which I really wanted to put them through some kind of experience that would get them out of themselves and do that as sort of swiftly as possible because we didn't have a lot of time. So I came up with the idea of inviting them all to an escape room in Toronto.
Nice.
And I said, look, we're going to do an escape room tonight after dinner, but I'd love you to do it in character. So rather than sort of sit and do lots of rehearsals of scenes, let's try this out. Nothing, nothing's wrong, but they all loved the idea. So they went in as their characters that they were only sort of forming. I kind of oversaw as a Mr. Craven sort of school teacher as if we were on a school outing. And we went to this escape room for a few hours, and it was just a brilliant. It was really encouraging, and they enjoyed it. But you could sort of see how they different characters were flirting with another character, and the other one was like protecting, and this sort of tentative romance starting to blossom between Chris and Ellie, and then I then sort of set the movie homework with a series of touchstone movies, and they rented a cinema in the hotel and watched The Lost Boys together,
Oh, nice.
which was a key sort of touchstone in the kind of not so much the content of the movie, but the kind of movie that I go back to when I think of a thrilling teenage horror movie that was fun, entertaining, scary, funny, and it was very kind of like imaginative and colorful, and it really captured that sort of teenage energy. So
Yeah.
it wasn't to sort of say this is what we're doing, but it was like this is one of the movies, and it was Lost Boys, it was Nightmare on Elm Street, and The Breakfast Club, I suppose, and then there was sort of The Blob, um, Fright Night, Donnie Darko, were some others.
It's the nerd in me when I was taking notes because I just saw the film yesterday.
Okay.
I couldn't help but note down the films that I noticed references to. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, I was thinking, was the Lost Boys the leather jacket that Daphne was wearing? Was that directly connected to Lost Boys,
Kind
or
of.
is that just a coincidence?
I think Lost Boys is sort of like overall in the sort of there was an energy with Jason Patrick and Corey Haim and the way their sort of banter goes
Mm.
and the jacket, the green army jacket, which is probably Chris's father's, passed down to her along with his record collection.
Yeah.
That was more like John Rambo. I said to Daphne,
Oh,
like
nice. Yeah.
you're this sort of lone character, lone wolf. The shot of him in First Blood when he's walking in, and when I saw Daphne in it, I was like, oh, she's John Rambo.
Yeah.
So, and then the leather jacket was, yeah, definitely connecting to a little bit more of a punk rock kind of look to her. And yeah, I mean, Lost Boys is just all over it in a way.
Yeah. No, I love it.
And there's lots of little nods, like you said, both stylistically, but also in some little Easter eggs throughout the movie.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's definitely one for the kind of 80s and 90s sort of horror fans to go in and kind of try and pick up on those if they
Hmm.
can. Looking across your horror work,
Yeah.
there's obviously a recurring interest in kind of ancient belief systems colliding with the modern world.
Hmm.
Uh, in Whistle, that's more kind of that mythology, I guess, feels more physical and kind of ritual based. Oh, I
Yeah.
can't believe you've. I was going to ask about where you can buy
Yeah.
those, but I'm not entirely sure I'd want one. Not a cursed one anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, is that something you're just consciously drawn to anyway? That ritualistic, the ancient
Yeah.
evils and curses, or is it just an area you think's good for horror in terms of?
I think both. I mean, I'm definitely like really fascinated by different beliefs, different cultures, stories, fairy tales, um, stories passed down, ghosts, paranormal, and and then on film, I am also drawn to like mythologies and ideas that can be translated cinematically, so they can't be too complicated that you can't tell around that story. In fact, when we did the Hallow with the Irish mythology, a big challenge when coming up with the script was like there's so many different ideas and so many different sort of folklore and fairy tales and beliefs. You have to like whittle it down and make it kind of a little bit more digestible because some of the ideas are like amazing but so out there and they work in a book. So with Whistle, what was really it really exciting was this ancient real thing that has a history, and you can actually Google it and you can go and see for yourself where it was found and what the beliefs are. But unlike maybe the Irish folklore, there's sort of a few different beliefs on what the death whistle was used for, and there's nothing like really solid. It's kind of like being used in ritualistic sacrifice, and um, it's been maybe used to as a battle cry going into war. It produces this incredible sound that is a like very kind of windy shriek sound, and yeah, and a lot more kind of ideas and mysteries surrounding it. So it was um, instantly fascinating to tell a story around.
I'm expecting Death Whistle sales to go through the roof when the film gets ready. So get ready for that. Hope you've got an Etsy shop or something.
Yeah,
Um, I want to talk about the death sequences a little bit.
yeah,
Um, so in the film, I understood that you kind of wanted to use practical effects where you could, and as a director, and I'm sure that's really challenging. But I was basically just wondering how you make that call on which avenue you're going to take.
yeah,
When it for each effect,
yeah,
should it be physical?
yeah.
Should it be CGI? And is there a lot of trial and error in that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's something that's very kind of conscious in my mind whenever I'm reading a script that involves any sort of effects. I'm reading it for the story, but I'm also kind of breaking it down and imagining how it could look at the end and how what might go into creating it. And as a big fan of physical things and tactile practices and real stunts and real practical effects and animatronics and doing things for real and practically as much as you can, but knowing the limit of them, because if you go beyond that limit, that's when you see behind the illusion and you see too much. And that's when visual effects are really, really handy to, if you can use them in clever, sparing ways, you can work both practically and with visual effects. So all the different deaths in Whistle involve a number of different techniques, and the type of death narratively is dictated by how that person ended up perishing.
Yeah,
And then that would inform conceptually what that's going to entail, what it's going to look like, and how it's going to happen. And that would inform the type of effects that we were going to use, that was subject to a lot of different meetings with all the different departments, production design, props, special effects, prosthetics, animatronics, visual effects. And it was a kind of constant case of whittling it all down. And then, yes, you don't always know. I mean, you do as much tests as you can to figure out how to the thickness of the blood in the consistency of the blood rain, and or how you're going to make someone explode in a certain way or twist in a certain way, or how much a contortionist can do for real when he's in a makeup of the actor, and when practical effects would be used for a cutaway, or when visual effects can make it all feel seamless. So
yeah. No, I think that's one of the more powerful elements in the film is that unseen. It's like the unseen thing that's responsible, that the person that's uh, being killed is
mhm.
aware of it and no one else is. It's a bit like It Follows
Mhm.
and A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah,
That's what makes it really scary, is the idea of
yeah,
no one else understanding what you're going through,
right.
and you're sort of,
I
which is
think
fantastic.
that was a big part of it. And I mean, generally, the lure of your death is going to happen sort of whenever possible in private, I guess, to not be kind of given away. But occasionally, I think the ego of this vessel probably also likes the idea that it can take people out in public, terrorize people.
Yeah, I particularly liked how long the mist of blood hung around after that
Great.
got minced as well. That was attention to detail there. I don't know if that's me
I'm
being
glad.
weird and
No,
noticing
well,
that, but
I'm glad you noticed it, because it's funny, but it is things like that which sometimes you have in camera, sometimes you have to extend, but it's important to what I needed to do was make sure it was clear that when you see these characters in their final moments, they resemble the vision that they had of their death at some other point in the movie.
amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations. Looking
thank you.
forward to seeing it down the road, and I
Yeah,
hope you have a good premiere in where have
Yeah.
you have it
I'll
in
see you. It'll
central
be
London?
Friday the 13th in Upfield.
Yeah. Oh, so it's going to be there on the 13th.
I'm
Oh,
going to do
brilliant. Yeah.
that's my yeah. So I mean, it hasn't been announced yet, but depending on when this comes out, it may well have been. So
Amazing. Perfect.
yeah,
Perfect Valentine's Day, I think, for me.
exactly,
Yeah. Excellent.
exactly. Good for
Brilliant.
some. Cheers.
Great meeting you.